Hello and good afternoon to you, and thank you very much for joining us for our Target Jobs Thursday afternoon webinar. My name is Matt. I'm one of the editors for Target Jobs, and I'm just going to be serving as your host and moderator today. And we're talking about employability skills, and we're focusing on resilience. If anybody has joined any of the webinars I think we've done over the last 2 years, you will have heard me going on about resilience an awful lot. So it's an absolute pleasure to be able to talk about it again today. We're joined, I think the first thing we should just go through some ground rules for the questions. We do have a question box, which should show up on the right-hand side of your feed. Please feel free to ask questions at absolutely any time, but we will come to them all at the end. There's actually an upvote system for questions. So if you see something that you want answered, don't retype it into the question box. Please just click the upvote arrow, and we'll start with the questions that have the largest number of upvotes when we get there. I'm just going to introduce you to Khadija Lewis, who is the attraction manager for Unlocked Graduates. And rather than have me sort of tell them what you do, Khadija, why don't you tell us a little bit about what, where you work and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me, Matt. So, as Matt said, I'm Khadija Lewis. I'm the attraction manager. That basically means I'm in charge of the strategy of making sure we get some really great graduates applying for our graduate scheme. So, we offer a 2-year leadership development program that trains outstanding graduates to be prison officers. So, as you can imagine, the theme of resilience is very, very relevant for the role that they do. So, I'd be happy to kind of debunk that and kind of discuss what we mean by resilience in this webinar.
Thank you very much. And it's as you say, it's quite an interesting. We have the right panelist for today's webinar, I think.
I'd hope so.
Um,
Yeah.
could you just tell us a little bit about Unlocked itself as well? Just what sort of training people go through, just to give a little bit of context.
Yeah, of course. So our mission at Unlocked as an organization is to reduce reoffending. So around 50% of people who are released from prison will reoffend within a year of being released. And that has a huge cost to the person who is affected, so the person who's being imprisoned, also to the economy. So it costs us about £18 billion to process people who are reoffending every year, and then also to their communities and loved ones as well. So a part of what we do is try to rehabilitate prisoners by working with them day to day on the landings. And we think the best way that we can do that to have the most impact is by recruiting these graduates, as I said, to be kind of brand three frontline prison officers so that they can build those relationships with prisoners and make sure that they're making a difference and kind of reduce those rates of reoffending. So the training that our participants receive starts at our summer institute, which is it's essentially 6 weeks of intensive training where they learn all of the safety skills, all of the people skills, they get all of the information about different types of prisons. They get to meet some really real kind of leaders within the sector about how they can be a really effective prison officer and lead change amongst the prisoners that they work with. And then that training continues throughout the program. So we also offer a fully funded master's degree as well, that allows our participants to develop the kind of academic understanding that they're gaining on the program day to day. So it's accredited by Leeds Trinity University, and it's a very custom made master's degree that, as I said, kind of reflects what they learn day to day. But they will have lecture days throughout the program, and then there's a chance for them to do a placement for 2 weeks in their second year of their program with a very wide range of organizations. And that is basically to take the learning that they have on the landings into different organizations, because we think that the way that we can have the most impact reducing reoffending is by getting people who have had frontline prison officer training in various different sectors. So yeah, it's a very structured program, but kind of really helps us achieve our mission of reducing reoffending.
Thank you so much. I just thought it was, we don't normally do that where we say, hey, tell us a little bit, but I think it's so interesting, and it feeds into our theme a little bit here, because you are going to so many different places and trying to learn so many different things. I think the best point that we could start on here is what is resilience. And I mean, I think when we've had this on webinars in the past and we've talked about it, and there is a perception that it is just about managing stress. But let's just start. What would, when you're looking, obviously recruiting graduates, what is resilience to you as a recruiter?
Yeah, so I mean, managing stress is definitely part of it. So we're looking for someone who remains calm when they're faced with challenges, and works with people to find an effective solution, but also thinking about how they aim to progress with people. So how they build those relationships and how they guide people to making kind of better choices and reducing those rates of reoffending, especially when those people can be quite challenging. So, people who may have been failed by other systems in their life, whether at school, social workers, the police, there are so many ways that the prisoners that our participants work with may have a mistrust in the system. So it's about remaining resilient when they're faced with those barriers, and still kind of treating them with compassion, and making sure that they kind of care for them, and give them that respect that they deserve. And then I think there's also something around, in very challenging roles, about developing key strategies that help you to cope and deal with different situations. So there's a lot of support that we offer on the program, but a part of being resilient is knowing when to say you need help. I think is a big thing that we like to emphasize as well. So hopefully that kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking for when we say resilience.
Thank you. And I think it's really interesting when you talk about how, obviously you've got to progress, because you're both dealing with people who need to deal with setbacks, who, and not just the fact that they may have ended up in prison, but there may be other challenges that go on through their life. But also the people, as you're working with those people, you're suffering your own setbacks, and you're having to deal with situations that may, make it difficult for you to grow and to learn after that. So I mean, obviously that's hopefully the training scheme is there to support people through it. But could you tell us a little bit about some of the strategies and things that a lot of resilience talks about, the growth mindset that some people either have or don't have, and sometimes need to learn. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how you need to train people to get into that kind of way of thinking.
Yeah, so another one of the attributes that we assess is sense of possibility. And it's personally one of my favorite ones, because I think it really frames the way that we like to train our participants to work with prisoners. So the sense of possibility refers to the idea that systems and people can change, and putting in the work, and that having that resilience, so that you can kind of follow through to the end, to make sure that you stay positive, and that those people do have the best chance of making kind of making a difference, and doing things differently in their life. So I think that the training really focuses on how you can work with different types of people, by not only understanding where they're coming from, but different methods of working with different types of people, that come from various different disciplines and schools of thought. So the training that they get in the summer definitely starts to introduce them into those different ways of working, whether it's speaking with different psychologists, or actually just learning from people who have lived experience. So at our summer institute that we just held in the summer, I sat in on some really interesting panels with men speaking about masculinities in prison, and how that impacts the likelihood of them reoffending, and what prison officers need to do to kind of be accommodating to that. So it's really weaved into the way that we do our training, and the way that we engage with our participants. There's always that kind of push with sense of possibility, and remaining resilient as well.
Could you sort of provide us with any example? I mean, the masculinity one's quite an interesting one. Like how do you approach something? Like how is it, because the resiliency is learning to work on that and to change that. How do you go about it? Are there any methods that you could share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of it is rooted in the idea of understanding different people's situations, and where their frustration may be coming from. So, for example, I spoke with one of the ex-prisoners that we work with, who works with an organisation called the Prison Reform Trust, and we were talking about Black History Month, and all of the things that were going on at the prison that he was visiting now, as someone who works there. So, great 180 that we've seen. Um, and he was talking about the different meals that are put out, and like cultural meals that a lot of Black communities enjoy, and that being distributed to the whole prison for Black History Month. He was explaining a situation where a prisoner got really upset because the rice and peas, which is a traditional like Caribbean dish, didn't taste very nice, and he lashed out. And if we're thinking about masculinities, and how some men can show their frustration, that is one of the ways, right? So he basically said that the way that the prison officer then dealt with that is asking him, okay, so what is it meant to taste like? How does your mum make it? Or how does the person in your life that makes great rice and peas, how do they make it? So it's not necessarily about de-escalating the scenario by restraining someone, or looking down on them, or kind of assuming that they're just aggressive for being aggressive sake. It's really about understanding where that frustration comes from, and what that can mean to them, because it's not just about the meal going wrong. It's almost about feeling like, oh, actually this makes me miss my mum, because she makes really good rice and peas, for example. So it's about breaking it down and seeing the different like the layers of the situation.
Thank you so much. I think that goes to the real heart of resilience. It's being able to learn from the situation and it's being able to adapt. And I think that, definitely there's the stereotype that when this happens in any workplace, the first thing is, well, you go to the handbook and the handbook says, in case of X, do Y.
Yeah.
But I love the way that you just said, actually you need to talk to someone and say, well, what is this? What is it supposed to taste like? Is it just because you're missing this or you're missing that? Like actually learning and adapting to that situation is really, I think it's really, really interesting. Are there, what are, I suppose because we're talking to a graduate audience who, will not have had training, will not maybe not have had the experience. What would you sort of say is the mindset or the set of skills that you need to get into to handle setbacks, to begin with, even sort of pre-career? Are there any recommendations you could give?
Yeah, so I think there's something around optimism that I think is really important for graduates to have. And I think a lot of graduates show when they're putting in multiple job applications, because it takes a lot for you to receive emails letting you know that you haven't gotten a job, or you haven't gotten it this time, or things aren't going the way that you want it to. There's that optimism that actually I'm going to apply to another thing and I'm going to put my all into that thing, and just staying consistent with it, which I think shows great resilience. I also think there's something around kind of being open to learn new things. So as you said, kind of, when you're trying to problem solve, it's about really understanding what the actual issue is. If you want help, or if you think that actually I'm really interested in this role, contact the employer. Like go and ask them, and see what sort of gems they have for you that they can share, that would mean that you do better in the application process. Or if you're worried about video interviews, like go to a video interview workshop. There's that kind of upskilling that I think is really important, especially when we're thinking about resilience, because it takes a resilient person to know when they need that upskilling, and when they need that support, as I mentioned before. Hopefully that answered your question.
That's amazing. No, I think that covers so many things that we've been talking about throughout the pandemic over the last year. Is that ability to learn, and the job hunt is such. It's the perfect example. Pre the world of work, it is something that, so you do require a sort of a slight innate resilience. You need to have the spark of it there, but it's not getting disheartened when you get rejected. It's being able to learn from, I'm going to improve. Like, I know that this is it's a difficult thing. It's something that you're going to face an awful lot of rejection, but I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to keep asking for feedback, and I'm going to keep developing, and I'm going to keep learning. And I think you kind of, that nails exactly on the head some of the things that we've been talking, because obviously it's been very competitive over the last year. For the start of 2020, there was very little available work for people, and it was very frustrating time. And I think it's that being able to keep going, even if you sometimes have to force yourself. You maybe are not feeling super optimistic, but you have to keep going on it. You have to keep doing it. I think that's, absolutely hit the nail on the head, is to try and push yourself to learn and to reapply and to reapply and to keep going. So, thank you.
No, cool.
How would you, so, I mean, obviously we're sort of saying, so you can see some indications. You've already said, when you see job applications coming in, but how do you measure resilience when you're looking at applicants who are coming to you? It's a lot harder than on a scale of communications, where you're like, oh, they're making eye contact, they shook my hand, it's absolutely fine, 10 out of 10. How do you measure resilience when someone's coming to you for applying for a job?
Yeah. So our recruitment process has been designed so that graduates and applicants can get a really good understanding of what the role actually looks like and what we're about at Unlocked. So it starts with a registration form, which, we're not testing resilience there. That's just so we can get your details. But then the next stage is a test your judgment activity. And it's basically a series of videos that then allow you to kind of see a cartoon, a sort of video, and then you select which action you're most or least likely to do. Some of those questions will be testing resilience because of the answer that we want you to choose. So it might be trying to see, like, how do you approach this situation? Is it a continuing situation? And if so, how would you treat it differently to a situation that's just come up, for example? And then in the video interview, which is the next stage, there is resilience tested in some of the questions because of the essentially what we ask. So it might be a question around, tell me about a time when something hasn't gone to plan and how you manage to turn it around. It could be a situational question about what would you do in this situation, for example. And then I guess the where kind of our assessment of resilience culminates is really at the assessment center, where we do 3 different activities: a practice scenario, which is basically quite similar to a role play, a group task, and then an interview. Resilience, as you can probably imagine, is tested quite a lot in the practice scenario, because what we're looking for in that situation where a graduate is faced with an actor who's playing the role of a prisoner, how do you engage with that prisoner? What is your demeanor like in that conversation, and how do you show resilience? Because I think it will be different from person to person, but what we are looking for more so is like the way that you interact with someone, and where your words are coming from, I think, as well, and what the intention of your words are. So I would say, overall, it's in the whole process, but I think a lot of people are more concerned or want to know about how they can show resilience in the practice scenario, which I think, yeah, like I said, is about how they engage with that actor in that situation.
So that's really interesting. I mean, that's that situational judgment tests, both as a form of kind of multimedia psychometric testing, but then also when you get to interview as well. And I mean, I want to come back to that and sort of suggest how people can build on it. But I think that one of the interesting things as well is we're talking about interviews, and we're talking about once you've kind of progressed a little bit past that initial stage of, right, where am I going to go? I've got a CV. And I mean, if there's a first paper sift, what would you expect to see on someone's CV or from their experience or on their application form that says, hey, this person might have the quality? I mean, obviously you're going to test it later, but what would you expect to see in terms of experience as to someone who'd been resilient as a graduate?
Yeah, I think I would look for volunteering experience, and what sort of volunteering experience. So we get a lot of questions about how graduates can prepare for a role working in the prison service and working with prisoners. And that's quite difficult to get volunteering working in prisons, especially because of the pandemic. Prisons have been really badly affected by the pandemic. There's loads of articles about it, and I would encourage you, if you're interested, to read it, to the people in the audience. But I think if you can get experience working with vulnerable groups or children or young people, that usually provides quite a lot of opportunities to develop your resilience, because you might be coming across people who don't necessarily want your help, and it's then about what you do with that. So let's say, for example, you're doing some reading lessons in a school. You go in after uni one day a week and you read to children who are struggling with their reading, for example. That requires resilience, because you may meet with a young person or a child who doesn't want to see you that day, and it's about what you do with that energy that they're giving you that then will help you develop those resilience skills. Similarly to potentially a food bank, like if you're coming across, if you're volunteering at a food bank and you meet some people who are facing some really challenging situations, how do you remain resilient to be in the right space to help them where you can, and signpost them to the things in the local council that can maybe help them? So there's loads of different things that I think a student can do to develop their resilience.
Thank you. That's interesting. It's more going to be the volunteering experience rather than something. I mean, I'm sure if if you think about it and you articulate it properly, you may find it from your part-time job or something like that. But I think particularly particularly in the sense for Unlocked, it's you want to be dealing with, as you say, people who don't want your help, but you're also having to interact with communities. You're having to interact with people who are not your peer group. They are not going to be fellow students or something. You're trying to develop yourself to be able to interact with other kind of demographics than what you're going to encounter in your classroom. So thank you for that. I was just thinking, because when we were talking last year about resilience, I mean, there were so many opportunities to volunteer for the NHS, whether that was delivering food, and nobody really wanted to be in lockdown, let's be honest, but there were going to be some people who were genuinely going to be struggling, and they're going to come to you with their problems if you were manning the phones, and some of the sort of the centres that they set up for people who are feeling isolated or vulnerable during the pandemic. You might be talking to people who are having real problems, and you are going to have to be resilient in order to kind of help them and to sort of stay strong through that as well, because everybody has sort of suffered. Thank you. I think that's really quite useful to think about the types of volunteering experience for anybody out there who's listening to this. Going back to psychometrics and interviews, where it's is there any way that you could learn? I used to say this, particularly, I think, in fact, I was doing a webinar the other night, and we were talking about psychometric testing and IQ tests, and it was something that they always said in I think A-level psychology, was you can actually improve at IQ tests by doing more IQ tests. It doesn't mean that you're becoming necessarily, you're not going to be Stephen Hawking because you've done 50 IQ tests, but you are going to get a lot better at doing IQ tests. Is it the same with resilience? Is this the sort of situational judgment that you could practice and practice and practice, or is there another way that might, help you to make the right calls in these situations when you've tested on them at interviews?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both, to be honest, because as much as we want people to do well at the situational judgment test and pick the right answer, we also want that to be the answer that is true to what their actual reaction would be, because it's all well and good kind of passing all of the stages of an assessment, but if you're pretending and you're not being yourself throughout those processes, it will be really difficult for that individual to adjust to the role. So I think practicing is very important, especially because there's often wording that's used in situational judgment tests or online tests that can be quite difficult to get your head around, especially if it's verbal reasoning based. I'd recommend doing as many of those as you possibly can. And go into your career service if you have access to those resources, getting feedback, kind of seeing what resources are online, because it will help you get your head around what sort of language to look out for, and how to know what the right answers might be and what the employers are looking for. However, in the situational judgment test that we have, it's more so about, this is the situation. Now, what are you going to do? As opposed to a more abstract questioning, which I think is quite difficult to practice. But we do have examples on our website actually where you can kind of click through different examples and see how you fare. So you can click what you're most likely to do. If it's the right answer, it will go green. It will tell you why it's the right answer. Similarly, if it's the incorrect answer, it will tell you why it's not that. So that is more of a tool to really understand what you can expect when you do the situational judgment test, but also the role. It can help you learn more about the role as well, because it explains why things are correct or incorrect.
Thank you. I think that's quite nice, because there's almost two halves to it. So as you say, for verbal reasoning and things, you by repeatedly doing those kind of tasks, you are learning to pay attention to how the question is phrased, and that attention to detail is quite important when you're doing those tests. But for some things like resilience, it is going to come down to your ability to make that judgment. It's going to come down to your kind of, it's not something that you can practice and just do enough of those tests and you'll be in the right situation. So it's almost kind of telling you, if you are doing these tests and you are finding that you're maybe not getting quite the right answer each time, maybe rethink where you want to be with your career, maybe rethink what you want to do a little bit. It kind of balances out, make sure that you're the right person to go into the right sort of role. Thank you so much for that. I think we just want to go just one more talking point before we move on to the questions. And I'm just I think it's more to do with the growth. We talk an awful lot about the growth mindset, and we've sort of said about, how do you get experience that shows you've got resilience, and there's an element of volunteering, but there's also this concept of learning and developing and progressing. Is there something else that you would expect to see on an application that would say to you, this person is really obviously very capable of adopting new ideas, of learning new things? I know, volunteering is the resilience aspect, where it's, hey, you can deal with people, you can deal with these situations, and you know how to move forward. But how about sort of learning new things? What would you expect to see from a graduate on a CV that would really say to you, hey, this person's really out there just trying to absorb as much new stuff as they can?
Yeah, I think anyone who's done university through the pandemic, I think has a good, probably some good examples of learning new things, because things went from being in person to virtual very quickly. People having to learn how to use a Blackboard and like Zoom meetings and stuff like that. I can imagine that for everyone who has done a degree during the pandemic is a good example. But I personally think that it's about the way that you talk about your degree, because that there'll be different assignments that you have to do. So for example, if it's a group assignment on something that you maybe didn't want to actually do, or if it's an extracurricular award that you got, for example, a notable award that you got, you can then speak about what it was that you learned, and how you kind of put yourself out there. I think for people who are lucky enough to do so, I think traveling and taking some time out can teach someone a lot about the type of person that you are, especially if you're got in spaces that are quite different to kind of your home country. And just kind of showing that you're able to adapt to different situations. But I think for people who aren't as kind of lucky or have the resources to be able to do that, I definitely think that volunteering in different types of places, or having a part-time job that is quite quite a conversation starter, can really teach you a lot about someone. And then it's an opportunity for you to kind of sell yourself and the skills that you learned during that part-time job, or during your time traveling, or doing that group project with on a topic that you didn't really know too much about and you didn't initially want to do. So I think a lot of the way that recruiters look at CVs and also application questions is about how well you can write about your skills. And a lot of the skills that we learn, especially at university, are transferable. So I think a big skill there is learning how to write about them.
Thank you. And again, for if you've joined us on this webinar, some really good points there. I mean, that if you've been studying during the pandemic, and I know there's complaints from both from teachers and from students, you know, all the new systems that were introduced to, okay, now we have to do remote learning. So, but rather than just go, well, we'll do it all on Zoom and I'm sure it'll be fine. So many universities went, we're going to use 5 different platforms and we're going to use this one for the reading and we're going to use, and you've had to adapt to all of those. And you know, I bet no one's put that on their CV. I bet it's the kind of thing that always gets overlooked. Like it's just, yeah, it's how you articulate it really makes the difference. And I think it's as you were saying, one that I always mention is there are some that stick in my mind from actually from young barristers events, where you know, obviously it's a super competitive, you know, kind of career to go into as well. And someone was saying one of the applicants that stood out to them, because everybody's got a first when they're going into law and everybody's got the same sort of sets of qualifications and similar work experience, but someone had told one of the barristers that they were a professional gin taster. And it was such a weird kind of and perhaps a little bit upper class sort of thing to do, but it's stuck in the mind, because obviously if you articulate that properly, well, I'm meeting new people on a regular basis, how do you even get started in that to begin with? I think that's you know, if you can articulate why you got interested in that, particularly at an age where you've probably only legally been able to drink for a couple of years, you know, there's so many ways. If you actually sat there and talked about that, I think you would find that there's actually, you are demonstrating how quickly you learn and how quickly you adapt, and various other skills, communication, probably teamwork, probably leadership, decision making, all that sort of stuff is really useful. So yeah, thank you. Absolutely great sort of points to articulate. I think we're about halfway through, and this is the time where we normally sort of turn to questions. So please do feel free to pop your questions into the question box, anything to do with resilience or unlocked. We've got one that's come in already saying your work is super interesting. Do you have a link to your website for further info? So we normally do this at the end anyway, but please, I guess, there we go.
That's the link.
Perfect, there we go. But please do keep any questions coming in. Just feel free to type them in the box and we'll go through them as much as we can, because this, obviously you're here to help with your job hunt. So please do ask questions. Don't be shy.
I think I'll just say on resilience and on a lot of the different attributes and characteristics that employers are looking for, it's really worth getting to know what an employer actually means by those words, because I think words like resilience and you know, leadership, and they can seem like quite abstract concepts, but I think when you actually get your head around specifically what that looks like in the role that you're seeking to go into, and exactly what your employer means by that, it means that you've kind of drowned out all of the noise surrounding that abstract term, and it allows you to really focus and find really relevant examples that, again, as you said, Matt, you can articulate well, so that can show how well you've shown that attribute, for example. So yeah, I just wanted to say that resilience will differ from employer to employer. What is resilience for Unlocked may be very different for a law firm, for example. So it's worth doing that research. And while I'm kind of going rogue here, I think doing submitting applications that are tailored to your employer is really important, and that's where doing the research into the employer and the characteristics they look for is really important, because I can always tell when an application's come in and it's the same one that they've submitted for another organization. I can tell as soon as I read the first sentence. So making sure that you really take your time when you're writing applications, you know, do your research, put something in that has excited you about the role, that you want to know more about. So yeah, that is just a rogue piece of advice there.
No, definitely. And I think it is, we get the same. We do hiring as well for target jobs when we're looking for editors and things like that. And you can tell the one, particularly when you're writing for editors, we know when it's the same application that's gone to someone else. We know when it's been copied and pasted. It really does show. So always take the time to customize them. It's actually interesting that you mentioned, resilience is going to be different. And that's why I was so delighted to see that we had someone from Unlock joining us on this webinar. Because the last time that we talked about resilience, I think was with KPMG. So obviously one of the big four, it was a financial firm, and it all absolutely, all still absolutely valid, similar points. You need to be able to learn from setbacks, but the context is going to be very, very different. You're talking about resilience in terms of trying to grow a business or grow a client base, or trying to make a sticky sort of financial situation improve. So it's much a different kind of mindset to go into resilience for something that's, as you say, a law firm or a financial firm or something like that, than when you're going to be working for Unlocked or working in any kind of more face-to-face sort of role, I think. So thank you for mentioning it. I think that webinar is recorded for anybody who's watching. That webinar is on YouTube. If you go looking for Target Jobs webinar resilience, hopefully this one will come up shortly afterwards, and the previous one that we did. So please do feel free to go and look for it.
Can I just comment on that as well, actually, just about kind of like the different ways that you can use resilience? So one of the things that our ambassadors quite like to do, and they've found that really puts them a step ahead of a lot of other people applying for different schemes and opportunities, is that when they go to a job interview and they say, I was a frontline prison officer for 2 years, these are all of the skills that I've learned, these are all the situations I was in, it really allows the employer to understand exactly where they would have shown that resilience, where they would have shown that relationship building, the motivation, the leadership, all of those different skills that are attractive to employers across all sectors. A lot of our participants and ambassadors use that as to elevate them into a different sector when they finish the program, because we don't specify that participants will need to stay in the prison service after the 2 years of the program. A lot of them, as I said, have gone on to doing very different things where they use the very real skills that they learn on a day-to-day on the landings in politics, in finance, in so many different fields. So yeah, I think for a lot of people, it's a good chance to learn those like tangible skills to then go on to something else as well.
That's a really good point. I mean, I think even on your homepage, I think on the grads homepage, there is a quote from someone who's gone on to, is it somewhere like Google? It's one of those major, I probably shouldn't mention company names, but that's it's like I do think when we've been doing interviews, particularly on sort of job related stuff, to people who are either quite senior at various different companies, everything from IT to engineering, to, as you say, to kind of politics or civil service or whatever it is. You do get a lot of people who are like, oh well, yeah, I was a prison officer. I was, sometimes it might be in a kind of in the services, providing assistance overseas or something like that. And it really does show that you can see how they've developed that resilience and how they've gone on. You can imagine the recruiters sitting there just going, well, they have the skills that we need. They probably have to get the qualifications to work in that field on top of it, but they've got someone who, once they get, just give them that book and they'll be fine. That that they can go on to do whatever they want to do. So we do have another question that's come in. Oh, crikey, sorry, question feed flickering on me. Asking, widely speaking, what kind of deviations in the difference of definition of resilience, growth mindset, or willingness to learn are there between different sectors? So we've just talked a little bit about this. I mean, is there anything you could lend perhaps from your graduates that have gone on to different sectors? Have they come back to you? Have you kept in touch? Maybe they'd be able to sort of lend us any sort of anecdotes that you've heard?
Yeah, of course. So I have one for sense of possibility, not necessarily for resilience, but I guess growth mindset might be quite similar as well. One of our graduates finished the program and then is now working at the Ministry Department for Education. And the way that he has kind of his growth mindset has changed, because when they're on the program, there's that sense of possibility instilling in those one-to-one conversations with prisoners and trying to make a difference that way. He's now working on policy for education nationwide. So it's still the same idea of wanting to make a difference and wanting to improve things, but the scale was completely different. But he actually said that he feels like he's getting a better understanding of his impact when he's on the landings day to day with the prisoners, because he can see that change. Whereas when he's working in policy, it's a little bit harder to see, but you just know that it's on a much wider scale. So I think that as kind of a first thing that kind of comes to mind is a good one to highlight, where you can use different skills in different sectors, but the outcome will look quite different. I think thinking about my own kind of recruiter background, I used to work at an organization that recruits graduates and trains them to be social workers. And their definition of leadership was quite different to Unlock's different definition of leadership. And that's still in the public sector. So that's what I mean about kind of going into depth about what employers mean with the characteristics and the competencies and the attributes that they're looking for, because it will differ within the same sector. So if you want your application to look favourable, I think having a good understanding of that is really important.
Yeah, and that definitely comes back to what we were saying, is about know who you're applying to, and do that research and do that work so that you understand the context in which you're going to have to kind of apply those skills. And maybe if you're, when you're making your career decisions, if you're not the right person, maybe make those decisions. Don't say, well, I'll do it anyway just because I'm going to bung a copy and pasted CV. Like, actually, ask yourself, am I right for this? Can I do this? I totally understand where you're coming from with that. So we've got just a comment that's come up in the question box saying, thank you, it's a very good topic to talk about. I'm a full-time mum and a full-time student at uni. During the pandemic, my online lecture and 2 children had online school. It was challenging, but I did it greatly. You don't realize your resilience, but determined to do it well. And thank you very much. As I say, I don't read names out on the questions, but thank you for sharing your experience. I just wanted to say that I think that is just a fantastic personal example, and people forget that you can use your own personal experience. So I won't go into details, but personally speaking, I've had family with dementia, and or Alzheimer's, and if you dealing with that, you do need a degree of resilience. How you articulate that to an employer, it's a personal experience. It's not something you necessarily perhaps think about putting on your CV. But if someone is asking you for your, a time when you have been resilient, it's the kind of thing that if you can articulate how, the sort of the pressure it puts you through and the way that you need to adapt and the way you need to learn around it. I think that's this, please do use your own personal experiences. And we've said this a number of times during the pandemic. I think even when people talk about, we're looking for problem solving skills, and so many of us think, well, we're just stuck at home, what problems are there to solve, apart from the fact I can't leave the house. And that's not, maybe you've had to repair your own computer, or your car's broken down, or maybe you haven't got a mechanic. You will always find these little personal examples. If you need something to say, do look to your personal life and see if you can apply that to your CVs and to your applications. I'm sorry, Kadja, I didn't mean to go off on one. But yeah, I think personal experiences like that are quite useful. I'm not sure if is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think using personal experiences is absolutely fine, and it can really teach you the breadth of the skills that you actually do have when you look into your personal life and think, oh, actually, I did do that. Oh, I did do that. I did that well as well. And I think sometimes in a question, if you're asked, being asked directly about resilience and you don't think it's maybe appropriate to mention a really personal example, think about the feelings that you had when you were going through that difficult time or going through that testing time, and kind of tease out those different skills and feelings that you had, and problems, and how you overcame them. So you're kind of giving someone a bit of an insight into the problems that you've overcome, but not necessarily bringing them into the personal aspect of it if you don't feel like it's appropriate. So absolutely use all of the experience that you have, personal, professional, academic, voluntary, and just make it, because that all makes up you as one person, if we're going to be honest. So letting people into different parts of that is absolutely great, especially during an interview process, because it shows the real you, doesn't it? So
thank you. And yes, I should have clarified that is please don't feel like you have to use you don't need to spill all of your personal experiences into an application. If you feel comfortable enough to use it, then do. I'm not saying that everybody absolutely must. So thank you for stepping me back there. This is yes. We haven't got any more questions, but please, if anything occurs to you, please do pop it into the feed. Perhaps, Khadija, you could tell us a little bit more about what you look for in graduates when they're coming to you. Just sort of looks a little bit at resilience. What do you expect goes with that when you've got someone who you're looking to hire?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned before, I've kind of alluded to when I was speaking. We assess using attributes at Unlocked. So it's a combination of desirable characteristics that we want to see in our applicants because we think those are the skills that make a great prison officer, essentially. So, sense of possibility I've spoken about quite a lot, but that's the belief that systems and people can change, and having the belief that you can change them by working with them. Leadership is another one. So making sure that you have a mutual respect for people that you're working with. It's that kind of like personal leadership that allows you to really understand where someone's coming from, to understand how they need to be led. But also the idea that there's a possibility that you might be promoted quite quickly and you'll need to lead a team, for example. So being really influential in changing attitudes and making sure that you are essentially an advocate for the people that you're working for and you're working with. And then decision making is another one as well. So as you can imagine, things on the landings can change very quickly. So we look for people who can make really quick, informed, and objective decisions based on the information that they have at that point. And that is assessed throughout our application process as well. And it's kind of emphasizes the acting confidently, and kind of making decisions confidently and believing in your own decisions, which is also important, especially when you're working with groups of vulnerable people, and how you kind of use those decision making skills. And then we have relationship building, which is obviously a very important one when we're thinking about reducing reoffending based on kind of those personal relationships. So it's really important to build those respectful relationships and treating the prisoners and other staff that you work with a lot of respect and compassion, but also then considering the professional boundaries and how and what is appropriate in that space. So it's quite a balance to kind of strike, but there's a lot of training on that, especially during our summer institute, a lot of role plays that take place that kind of show you how to develop those boundaries. Um, and then self-awareness is an important one, especially because we're a leadership development program. Self-awareness is always very important when we're thinking about that growth mindset. So being able to understand how you work best, reflecting on situations that you've been in, and like how you can develop. And I think again, it relates to the resilience aspect that I spoke about earlier, is knowing when to kind of reach out for help, or know when there's a certain skill that you could develop, for example. But having that ability to step back and reflect and kind of be self-aware is always really important. And then the final one, number 7, is motivation, and that one's really important because it is an intensive program, and it does require you balancing kind of working full time and studying part time as well, working with challenging groups of people, but also really buying into our mission of reducing reoffending, and kind of rehabilitating people one person at a time, working on the landings, and believing in Unlock's mission, and wanting to be a part of that movement. So yeah, we it's quite simple to kind of figure out how we recruit, and how you can put your best foot forward in an application. And a lot of employers will have that information on their website. A lot of us aren't trying to catch students out. A lot of the information is either available on our website, or it's a call away. You can call or message an employer, and find out what it is they're looking for from people. You might have to do a little bit of digging, especially in competitive sectors, but absolutely for the public sector, I can speak for the fact that recruitment teams are always up for a chat and kind of explaining what we're looking for in a bit more detail.
Thank you. I'm really glad we kind of went down that sort of avenue, because it is interesting to hear you talk about all the things that feed into the skills, because they are all connected to each other. When you talk about leadership, whether you talk about as you're saying, kind of the growth mindset, decision making, how you act, and making sure that you stand by your decisions, they all kind of feed into each other, and they feed into this concept of resilience as well. It's absolutely I think it's really quite fascinating, and as you say, contacting people as well, and we were talking about this earlier with the job hunt and everything, how it can be a little bit, you need to stay optimistic, you need to be able to reach out to people. It's something that we always recommend, whether you do it on LinkedIn, not with the standard hello, please, I'm from LinkedIn, thanks very much. Actually send a message saying, hey, look, I'm a student, I'm interested in what you do, please come back to me, please talk to me. It's trying to make that effort to keep going, and to make contact, and to do it in a way that shows that you've got the right communication skills and the right sort of savvy to get by. So thank you for sort of feeding all of that into it. I think the decision making one as well is quite interesting. And again, I'm just really curious as to, what do you see on application forms, or when people come to you, what sort of experience speaks to this person makes strong decisions, that we know this person makes the right decisions? Is there some sort of piece of experience that you normally look for?
Yeah, is there a key to someone who
Yeah.
makes good decisions? Do you know what? In our application process, so we don't have an application form, so we don't assess anything there essentially. But when you get to assessment center stage, there are quite a few examples for you to show decision making, and because on the landings it's quite high pressure and the decisions are having to be made very quickly with sometimes limited information. It's about testing how you interpret, understand, process, and then make a decision. So it's part of a bigger story and example of your ability to understand and communicate, be resilient. So it's all part of that bigger story. But I think when thinking about decision making, if I was looking at a CV, for example, society experience, like on a society executive, is great experience to have when thinking about decision making, especially if you're, yeah, as I said, on the executive in any position. To be honest with you, I was on a panel earlier this week speaking about how students with society experience can maximize their experience for applications, and you don't realize how much experience you get working with societies. As I said before, doing volunteering, it's just about how to articulate that is the important thing. But if you can kind of take a situation where you are presented with multiple examples, multiple situations and choices. There was a decision that needed to be made. There were various people who will be impacted by this decision. What decision did you make and why? And you're flying. Like, as long as someone can see that that was a sound decision, that's a great way to kind of show that decision making. But I think for anyone in the audience who is a member of society, on the exec or thinking about going on to an exec, the experience that you get is invaluable. So I'd really recommend looking into that if you're able to.
Thank you. It's again really useful. I mean, it's that position of responsibility, I think, with student executives, student societies. You're in a place where the decisions that you make will have an impact, either financially or personally, or just socially on people. And it's being aware of the results of that as well, as you say, feeding back and understanding, again, feeding into the resilience. Is this going to be better? How are you going to adapt? How are you going to next time? Are you going to improve on this? So I think it's really nice that all feeds in. So we haven't got any more questions. I just wanted, I think, we should probably sort of look at coming to a close very shortly. I just wanted to, is there a last message, Khadija, that you would leave to everybody listening? Just to say, how would you go about sort of testing and understanding your resilience, like understanding whether you are resilient, whether you are the right person? What would you recommend that people do at this stage?
First of all, I'll say I'm going to promote Unlock's graduates here in our program. I would say to apply for the Unlock Graduates program. Applications are open, and our next closing date is the 17th of December. So would really recommend putting in an application soon, and then you'll see, those examples that I used today come to life about how you can really understand more about how your resilience would be tested on a graduate scheme like this. So that's the first thing I'll say. But then I also think there's at university, if those of you in the audience are still at university, there's great opportunities to test your resilience in different ways that is quite safe, because you have the safety net of kind of student services, and hopefully means that kind of you can make mistakes and bounce back from it. University is that time to kind of take advantage of that space that you have to try new things, and if it goes wrong, that's fine. So I'd recommend, as much as you possibly can, taking advantage of that. Getting involved in different societies, speaking with your career service and seeing if there's anything that they would recommend, going along to workshops, speaking with employers. There's so many opportunities out there, and so many different ways that you can get engaged and involved with your student body, that I would really recommend just taking those examples, and opportunities up, and making the most of them, and then figuring out the best way to articulate them. Like as Matt said earlier, as long as you can articulate something clearly, and in a way that really shows employers what you've learned, I think, yeah, you can turn any experience that you think may not be very relevant into an extremely relevant and valuable experience that an employer would love to see.
That's absolutely great advice. And I think it's, under that umbrella of university, generally you are a little bit protected, just as when you start with a job, you're going to be given training, you're going to have management, there will be people, you can refer to and learn from. You do have a lot of that at university as well, and it's a little bit of a safer space. People are used to dealing with people who are going through those stages of learning and developing and going on to the world of work. So there's perhaps, it's an easier place, an easier sort of sandbox to learn in. But thank you. And for any of you that do want to sort of learn how to articulate your skills, we do have plenty of advice on targetjobs.co.uk. If you go looking, we've got everything from the STAR method for sort of your competency questions. We've got how to answer strength-based questions. We've got motivational-based questions, how to answer those. And then also for different sectors as well, how to get into whether you're trying to write for editors who are taking your job application or whether you're going to various other locations. So please do check out the website. It may help you with your career search and with making your applications. I just want to say thank you very much, Khadija, for joining us today. Really, absolutely just fascinating and really quite interesting talking points to go around today on the topic of resilience. Once again, if you just tell people where to find you online.
Of course. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It was great speaking about resilience today, and hope that those of you in the audience found it useful. So I put our website in the chat. It's unlockgrads.org.uk as our website. We also have a really informative YouTube channel that I'd recommend checking out if you want to know more about the stories of our participants and ambassadors, what they've gone on to do. So that's just Unlock Graduates on YouTube and on all other social media platforms. So as I said, our applications for the graduate scheme are open now. We're also recruiting for brand ambassadors as well. So if you're based on a campus and want to kind of make some extra money, but also are really intrigued by our mission and the work that we do, we would absolutely kind of love to see an application from you. So there's a lot of different opportunities to get involved with. But thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thank you again for joining us. And for those of you out there, it's obviously quite difficult when we do these webinars because we can't see you and we can't actually hear you. So it's quite a sort of, it's an odd feeling. So if you have found this useful, please just pop some thank yous in the chat just so that we know that you're out there, so that you found something that might just help you a little bit in here. Please do just let us know in the question box or in the chat box, whichever's easiest. And thank you very much for listening. We will see you in the next one with any luck. So that's all from us. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.